Welcome to another Technical Tuesday episode. Now, over the years, we have dealt with many topics, some technical in dealing with such things as installing solar panels. However, we've dealt with a lot of different aspects of sailing, especially our interest in design and how sailing has evolved. Now, a lot of you know that Ruby Rose 2 is going to be a Seawind 1370, and who better to explain a 1370 than the CEO, the founder of Seawind, and someone who has spent 30 years designing catamarans. Richard Ward, you need no further introduction. Welcome, and thank you so much for letting us stay in your beautiful farm.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Teresa. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So we're going to dive in with some questions. A lot of these questions have been put to Richard by our patrons, so we will jump straight in. The 1370, it has been designed by you. It has been an absolute overwhelming success. But what about this design makes it a Seawind?
Look, its generic background is Seawind. Everything in the 1370 is basically Seawind. You can see the 1160, you can see the 1260. You can see the Seawind 1000 in the 1160. What we want to do with the 1370 is, first off, we had a big jump from 41 feet to 52 feet. We needed a boat in the centre. I believe that 45-foot range is a pretty good place for people to be. Yep. If they're going to seriously cruise the world. And so that was probably the biggest driver, that we wanted something in that mid-range area that met the market, met the need. A lot of people did feel that they needed a boat bigger than 40 foot, but into the 50s was just too big to handle.
Yeah. So the sweet spot, I mean, we've talked, independently about the sweet spot of 45 foot. And I remember when I bought my first boat, it was a 25 foot, a Jaguar 25, tiny little thing, built in the 80s. And I managed to locate the original brochure for the Jaguar 25, that was for the sales pitch. And it said then that a 25 foot boat was perfect for a family of five berths. And I guess now that even we in the last 10 years have seen the market evolving and pushing bigger boats for lifestyle. I mean, is that something that you've seen over the course of your career in building boats?
Look, it's certainly something we've seen. It's not something I necessarily approve of entirely. I think that unfortunately people are starting their sailing career in boats that are way too big. And one of the things that I often talk to people about that are new to sailing is learn to sail on a dinghy. Get your sailing skills up on small boats, because then you can feel the water, you can feel your surroundings, and you'll become a much better sailor. And then graduate up to the big boats.
Yep.
But we live in a different world.
We do. I mean, we put an episode out probably about 3 years ago, another Technical Tuesday, how to start sailing. I'll put a link to it up here. And that was filmed way before you and I met. And we say exactly the same thing. Cut your teeth on smaller boats for many reasons. Number one, it's safer. Number two, there are a lot of people, and let's just cut through the fog that the brokers may sell you, that just won't get on with sailing, that the lifestyle doesn't work for them. And irrespective of whether you buy a big boat or a small boat, you spend 10% on brokerage fees. So if you don't get on with the sport, you can literally sell a smaller boat for a lot less financially. And investing such a huge chunk of money in a big boat as your first boat, I don't believe is the right way forward. Now, we've got some very good friends that are they're expert sailors that take the completely opposite view, that go out and do it. And I think it really is testament to the fact that everyone has different views, but it's nice to hear that, you and I share a similar ethos in starting small, hone your skills, see if you get on with it, and then kind of grow into the passion. So moving on, you've designed a 1370, and you've said it's the boat to take people around the world, to take a couple or a small family safely around the world. what specifically about the 1370 is different, and how is that going to affect people's ability and lives and experience?
It's designed designed with the same philosophy and principles as all the other Seawinds. Basically, it's a sailor's boat for sailors.
Yep.
And I think that's really important because, first off, sailing should be fun. It should be exciting. It should be rewarding. And a boat that performs is just that.
Yes.
A boat that doesn't perform, sure, it'll get you there eventually, but it's nowhere near as much fun as a boat that really sails well. So that was number one thing that we had to do, and it's something that we achieved with our other Seawinds, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't fail in that area. All of our boats too, all of our Seawinds have always been, they've been a good mix. They're cruising boats. We don't pretend to be, they're good performance boats. We don't pretend they're the fastest thing out there on the water. They're not Formula Ones. Mm-hmm. They're BMWs. Or,
it's a good analogy.
Yeah, and so they have to be good cruising boats. But with the 1370, we've also managed to put a lot more volume into the hulls.
Yep.
Without increasing the waterline drag, mm-hmm. and so that this boat will also become a good charter boat.
Yep.
It'll become a good family boat. It'll become a good liveaboard boat.
Yep.
Without going into the apartment on the water area.
Yeah, when we've seen this, I mean, obviously we've been working with you and with the whole team over in Vietnam and with Antoine, and he everything that he has told us, and it reinforces what your ethos is. It has kind of built on that, and it does seem as if you have hit that sweet spot in livable size without compromising the performance. I mean, that's to say, I think if you were to get onto a comparable, I mean, it's a 45-foot boat. I think if you were to get onto another brand of production catamaran at 45 foot, you're never going to get the space. But I think a lot of people, and this is something that Antoine did say, I think that people now are becoming more attuned to buying a boat that does perform, and they're willing to sacrifice some space for performance. Is that something that you buy into, that people are becoming more aware of how important performance is?
Yeah, without performance, it's a relative term, obviously. As I said before, it's nowhere near a race boat.
Yep.
It's it's nothing like the America Cup catamarans of a few years ago, but it needs to be a boat that can get you out of trouble quickly. It can because it's not ultimate speed, but good performance speed is a safety feature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Know that you can plan your voyage. Know that if you're predicting a certain type of wind, then you will achieve the speeds that to get you into where you want to get to at the right time. I don't actually believe that we lose too much space.
Yep.
I think that what is probably equally important in that equation is don't fill your boat up with stuff you don't need.
Yep.
Don't fill your boat up with things for contingencies that just might happen.
Yes.
Wait till they happen, prove that you need it, then go out and buy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's keep your boat light, keep your boat simple, keep your boat uncluttered.
Yep.
And your enjoyment will be so much greater. One of the things that you find, I've sailed on boats which just had everything on it, and you get yourself in a crisis it's blowing 40 knots, the seas have got up. Mm-hmm. You need to find some shackles or something. Yep. You can't find them because you've got to plow through about 6 months of storage,
Yeah.
and whereas the good boats that I sailed on, people can put their hands on everything immediately.
Yeah.
And that means an uncluttered boat. It means an ordered boat, and that's the way to sail in my regard.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, look, I laugh because I think while I knew where everything was on Ruby Rose, and I could lay my hands on a shackle pretty quickly, we also had a spare starter motor, a spare alternator, and they added weight that, you know, and when we were moving off Ruby Rose, I'm like, how much weight have we added and dragged around unnecessarily around the globe for eventualities that never came to pass? Yeah, and you're completely correct. And it's kind of like, it's lovely to hear that, because yeah, that's a mistake we made. But we you know, sailing is a lifelong learning experience, and these are the little lessons that, you know, you get from more experienced sailors. You know, your enjoyment decreases as you know, as the amount of clutter you have on boat.
And remember too that most people are sailing in places that are, you know, that have facilities for boats.
Yeah.
You're not going to the Antarctic.
No.
But if you do, then you need to make sure that you've got things that are going. You can replace your alternator if it fails.
Yeah.
You know, because there's not too many mechanic shops down there.
No.
But most places where people go to, you know, if you, I don't know, even if you lose an engine,
Yep.
make sure that you're not going to starve, get there under sail, and then get it fixed. Rather than carrying something around in your boat for 5 years and realise that, well,
Yeah.
I
It's
probably
still
didn't need to do that.
Well, I guess, look, from our point of view, I mean, we did 25,000 miles in 5.5 years. And the only problems that we really had were with engines, and that was dirty fuel or things going wrong. And so I guess the redundancy of having 2 engines in a catamaran, you know, the fact that even if one engine goes wrong, you've got another, and you've got
Absolutely.
separate filtration systems. So yeah, it kind of removes that kind of issue, because we've always got a backup engine. So yeah, I think that, to me, just from reassurance and safety, fills me with more confidence. So yeah, so I mean, you've been designing catamarans for 30 years, and a lot has changed over those 30 years. I mean, we, coming from monohulls, have seen the advent of certain features, and sometimes they're not the best advances. What is it that you've noticed that's come into play in the last 30 years? How has catamaran design evolved? And specifically, is there anything that you kind of miss from the old way of doing things, or the way that you were doing things when you started?
I'll answer the last question first. Is no.
Okay.
I think what's happened over the last 30, 40 years is fantastic for catamaran design and for catamaran construction. The materials we have these days are just simply amazing, and the engineering we have these days is also amazing. We can engineer, if you can think about it, if you can design, if you can imagine it and design it, we can build it. Whereas 30, 40 years ago, you possibly couldn't.
Yep.
The current America's Cup monohulls that are in Auckland at the
amazing.
moment, they're a good proof of that.
Yep.
I mean, how does that work? It's just, it's mind-blowing.
It's witchcraft, isn't it?
It's witchcraft, that's right. So, and we made a big breakthrough in our design when we brought out the 1160, and we had the folding doors that lifted up into the ceiling. Now, what that did, and we also had the saloon that was open to the galley and to the port side area, and when we designed that, I was really concerned that we just couldn't build it, because it was such a big open structure that the loads on the boat would just make it impossible. Fortunately, we worked with a really clever design company from New Zealand called High Modulus at the time, and they were able to do this, and basically In a cruising boat, we have that's of course there's absolutely zero problems
Yeah.
over something like about now 200 boats of that model that we built. So they're the sort of things that just weren't possible 4 or 5 years ago. 30 or 40 years ago. The fact that you can create the ergonomics that you want in a boat is really good. So you can create the boat that you want to live in, whereas I think beforehand some of the catamarans, like catamarans that were designed by people like Loch Crowther and whatnot, they were great boats, but their liveaboard pleasure and the ergonomics of those boats were nowhere near as good as the boats that are being built today.
So that kind of raises two questions for me. The first is the trifold door, which kind of, with the exception of, I think, the Seawind 1600, it's present across the range. So you've got it in all the 1160, the 1260, and it's going to be on the 1370. Now, we have done a whole series of technical episodes which have dived pretty deeply into how the actual material science and the structure. How you said that you worked with a New Zealand company that essentially enabled you to create such an open space and retain structural integrity. How do they do that? Is it just a clever use of kind of like?
Well, first off, it's very complicated composite design technology and engineering. I think on that they use finite element analysis so that they could absolutely see the results of all sorts of forces and forces on each part of that structure. It's something that just wasn't around before. Composite engineering has allowed things like these America's Cup boats to be built.
Yep.
But how you can lift a boat of that length on a single foil is just amazing, and you could not do that without very complicated, very sophisticated engineering and the materials to be able to back it up.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've watched the material science come about, and it's just, even, I've been sailing for 15 years, just watching the development in materials, making boats lighter and stronger. It is, and it's going to be very interesting to see how things move forward over the years, and we'll get to that, as we continue to talk. I mean, at the moment, regarding Ruby Rose 2, the 1370, like, you've built a lot of features into this boat that, I mean, primarily the three most important features of any boat for any user: safety, number one; number two is safety; number three is safety. It's all about safety and getting a family or a couple safely between points A and B, whether points A and B are two ports on a day sail, or whether A and B are the same when you've done a full circumnavigation. But aside from safety, what are the important things that you've put into the boat that we're going to get that are important to your design?
Look, I think what we've done with that boat is we've created a design that is a very livable design. It's something that will be an absolute pleasure to be on board. It will reflect the style of living that a lot of people look for these days. Like, for example, with houses now, people like the idea that the exterior of the house and the interior of the house are not two separate places. They're linked, so people can flow from one place to the other.
Yep.
And that's something that we pioneered with the 1000, 1160, and the 1260. The 1370 carries that on, and even to a greater degree, because what we've done is we've eliminated any even the smallest step between the saloon and the cockpit.
Yep.
The transom steps flow into the cockpit. The cockpit flows into the main saloon. Ergonomics, I've been a great believer of ergonomics throughout all our boats. I don't believe you should have to worry about hitting your head
Yep.
anywhere. So you should be able to walk through your boat without remembering that that's a head-hitting area. As much as possible, we try to keep all the lines out of the living areas. So in the cockpit now, there's absolutely no reason why there's any lines lying on the cockpit sole.
Yep.
On the 1370s, you know, we've now taken the lines underneath the deck, and that does a number of things. One, it keeps the lines nice and clean. It doesn't get them salty and crusty,
Yep.
and it doesn't get them weathered by the sun. So the lines will last longer and be more supple in your hand, which is good. Sailing all our boats, and we've made sure that we continue this with the 1370, can be sailed very easily by a couple, and if necessary, sailed by one person. So, if your mate's, not feeling up to it, or just simply tired, or wants to read a book, there's no reason.
What?
Just touch her.
Yeah.
I think you're the one who's tired.
We'll edit that bit out.
And it's a boat that you can sail yourself, or Teresa can sail herself if you're the grumpy one.
I don't know what you're talking about, Richard. Okay. So in extension to that, you obviously designed the 1370 as a blue water cruiser, like passage maker.
Absolutely.
So are there any specific features that you've integrated into this that you kind of, you want to kind of focus on as, what are the blue water features of this boat? What is it that, how is the 1370 practical for those couples like us that are going to kind of like head off into the sunset?
Okay. Well, firstly, you come back to performance. Performance is very important. Underwing clearance, we've increased the underwing clearance, and none of the Seawinds suffer badly from underwing clearance, but you don't want to go too high, because that's a problem, because then you end up just with too high topsides, and then you suffer from the problem with windage.
Yep.
And being in a really high topsides boat with crosswinds is uncomfortable.
Yep.
So this word compromise is never far away from any design discussion. We've done things on the 1370 that are a little bit different. That we certainly haven't stood the windows up vertical, but we've stood them up a little bit more, about another 5 or 7 degrees.
Yep.
And by doing that, we've created a lot more space inside.
Okay.
I don't like straight up and down windows, because I believe that if you're in a boat that is offshore in big seas, you don't want a barrier like that.
Yep.
You want the waves to be able to slide over the top of your boat. I think we've improved on the 1370. We've improved on the shade over the cockpit.
Yep.
And we've continued the cockpit roof aft of the targa bar and the main sheet traveller track, and what that gives you is a place. So we've got rid of the stainless steel framing that we've been using on the other boats, and used the solid glass area, which will hold the solar panels. There's going to be a huge area for solar panels on the 1370, and that's a good thing.
Yep.
But also it gives a lot more shade into the cockpit from, especially when you're at anchor.
Yep.
And
Yeah, look, I think, we started looking for a blue water cruiser a couple of years ago, and it's a little bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Everything was too hot, too big, or too small. And this does seem to fit the sweet spot. But I think that we've also done a lot of research, and we're still working with Shane and yourself about the renewable aspects of this boat and how we generate power without reverting to a genset, which I honestly believe that nowadays energy efficiency is at a level where you can, unless you want to run pretty high, energy usage appliances, you don't need a genset. That's my personal preference, and I think that the weight that it gives you, that it adds to a boat, is unnecessary. Now, we have had a lot of discussion, and you may be able to contribute to this, about electric motors, and then using a genset to power to kind of replenish the lost electricity. I personally, I don't buy into that. I don't buy into it at all, because essentially the weak point, the weak link becomes your genset. And in all the cruising we have ever done over the years, one constant seems to be that we would go into an anchorage and meet boats that are always tinkering with their genset because it's packed up. Because they run at high load, and I think that creating that weak point in your ability to drive a boat out of an anchorage, to outrun a storm if you're in a wind hole, I think that is something that I didn't want to compromise on. I mean, how do you feel about that sort of thing? I mean,
I think they're good points. I do like the redundancy of two engines on a catamaran. I think that's really good. The other point about cats and a cat like the 1370 is that they're so easily driven, they're so easily sailed, that if you're enjoying your sailing and you're a sailor, then you will sail most of the time.
Yep.
So you're only going to use your engines to leave the anchorage, get back on the anchorage.
Yep.
Largely, but there'll be days when there's absolutely no wind, or the conditions are that you might want to run an engine.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll find, as you get more used to your boat, and as you become a better sailor and all this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the general thing.
It's always an improvement.
And that your amount of fuel that you'll use is incredibly small.
Yep.
And so the cost saving of being in an electric boat, I think is going to be pretty minimal if the boat is the right sort of boat.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to when there will be reliable, affordable electric solutions.
Yep.
At the moment, I don't believe there are.
No.
And so we're reluctant to go down that path at the moment. It's everything. Every time we've looked at it, the solution has just been too expensive, and it's afforded so little benefit
Yep.
that we just couldn't see the point of it. So I'd rather, but as you said, I think the redundancy is a big factor of it. And again, whether you'd have, the question about whether you have a generator on your boat, it comes down to the design philosophy of the boat, and also the user philosophy, I suppose. And for me, I like to keep my boat fairly simple. I like to keep my lifestyle simple. I don't need gadgets that I can do in another way, in a much simpler way, which is uses less energy and is more complicated to maintain.
Yeah. The keep it simple.
Absolutely,
philosophy,
keep it simple.
And as an aside, I mean, Jimmy Cornell recently set off in his electric Catamaran, and he didn't put a generator in it, and I can see why he didn't want to do it, but unfortunately he had to turn back. And I think that, again, there is something to be said when we looked into electric solution or electrical motors, that the laboratory statistics that you get for range and power output and regenerative ability don't often tally up in the real world. So when you get to sea, you find out that you're not putting the energy back into your batteries. And I think that's an important lesson. And I tend to agree with you that I think electric solutions are going to change sailing, but not yet. I think that's probably
I think that's probably right. I don't know, exactly what the future holds in that regard, but at the moment, the future.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move away from the 1370, Ruby Rose 2 and Seawind. I have always said that the best way to learn anything about sailing and about lifestyle is to talk to people that have done it with experience. You have 30 years of experience. You've been building boats, but you've also sailed hundreds of thousands of miles. So you have been a liveaboard sailor. So if you had to give advice to people that are just starting on this journey, people like I was, 15 years ago, just buying a little boat and starting off, how are there any nuggets of advice that you can kind of give to the people that watch what we do as to how to transition from wanting to sail to getting onto the water and ultimately living the life as a liveaboard?
Well, I think your questions just answered it.
All right,
Talk to Nick and go and find out how he did it, because buying a little boat first is the way to do it. Put the time in. We have had too many people who bought their Seawind as their first boat,
yep,
without having any idea how to sail, and that's no good. And expecting to be able to get on their boat and go cruising.
Yep.
Now, anybody can cruise if the seas are flat, and if it's blowing 15 to 18 knots.
Yep.
Anybody. But what you need to do is you need to get the experience about what happens when things go wrong, how to protect your mate on board, make sure that they're safe, and the best way to do that is become competent.
Yep.
And it's not a theoretical course that you do over a week. It's a practical thing that you learn over quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I would love to see people who are wanting to buy a boat to go cruising, go and do a course, a practical course, not a theoretical course, because the theory will pick up very quickly.
Yep.
It's the practice that's really hard. Go and do a practical course, but don't do it together. The husband goes one way, the wife goes the other way.
Yep.
Let her go and learn separately, because she'll learn independently and not rely on you and be forever looking, for advice or confirmation or whatever. Crew on boats, do some racing, offshore racing, because offshore racing, by its very nature, you get a lot of crises and you have to handle them.
Yep.
And learn to be practical. Make sure that you don't specify your boat so that it's so complicated that you don't understand how to reasonably fix. You won't be able to fix everything, but reasonably fix most things on your boat yourself. Because if you're out in the Pacific, you often don't have too many other people to call on to help you. One of the things that I'm a big believer in boats is make sure, again, it comes back to what I said before, keep your boat uncluttered. Don't have things just in case, don't have too many things just in case, but do have a good store of small rope that you can put your hand on, because you can fix a lot of things with rope on a boat. But you've got to be able to, you need different thicknesses of ropes, different lengths of boats, and you can be able to put your hand on them in a second. And you can avert a lot of disasters with rope on board. And the other thing is that put the time in. We've had people that have, with almost no experience, think that they're going to go straight out into the Pacific and go cruising. That's crazy. I mean, if you're incredibly lucky, you'll get away with it. But 9 times out of 10 you won't. And it'll spoil your enjoyment of your boat.
Yep.
Put the 6 months in and learn your boat. Expect to have things go wrong. You know, with boats, they're hand built. Things do go wrong. Get through that process while you're close to shore and in range of somebody who can come in and help you fix it. You know, if you're in, I don't know, if you're in Kiribati or something like that, you're probably not going to get the best help.
Yeah. Probably. To the Kiribati Tourist Authority, Richard.
I do apologise.
I guess we've come from two different sides of the planet, two different with two different sets of experiences, and we both agree with the same thing. And all I would say is, just in addition to that, and again, it harks back to the video we made about how to start sailing. Most sailing clubs in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in Australia and in the USA, are more than happy to take people in. It's a very, very welcoming and inclusive club. And we have always said, go and find your local sailing club and ask how to get involved. How can I get involved in doing what you do? And it's a good way of experiencing a little bit taste of this life with zero financial commitment. They will, sometimes you have to pay for like your share of diesel or propane or food if you go crewing for a weekend. But sailors are a very, very inclusive bunch of people. And, I remember I was in the Bahamas a couple of years ago and bumped into members of the Kansas Sailing Club who were chartering in the Bahamas. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that I didn't know this because I'm not, my geography of American landmass isn't brilliant. Kansas is landlocked. So even in the middle of the contiguous United States, there are sailing clubs. So look up your local sailing club and just see how you can get involved, whether it's dinghy racing in the evenings or cruising at the weekends, and try that way, because you will learn so much from experienced sailors.
Absolutely. And as you say, I don't know a skipper, except, don't expect to walk down to the Cruising Yacht Club in Sydney and step onto one of the hot boats. Yep. That's not going to happen. No. But there's lots and lots of boats that are still fun to sail. They're doing all sorts of races, or all sorts of cruising. Almost the common story that you hear all the time is how difficult it is that skippers find to get a crew.
Yeah, absolutely.
And boats need maybe 5 crews. Some need more, some need less, but they're always looking. And if you're handy, it doesn't matter whether you know absolutely nothing about sailing. As long as you're willing, sit on that rail. Yep. Don't say why. Just go and sit there. Yeah. Volunteer to do the washing up, all those sorts of things, and you become a useful crew. And pretty soon you'll become a useful sailor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the way to go.
Yeah, look, I agree 100%. And I think it's interesting that you do get people that ask how to do it, and it is pretty simple and it's almost free. So, okay, look, thank you, Richard. So looking forward to the next 30 years. Obviously, you've had 30 years of yacht design. Going forward, where do you see it going? I mean, you've talked already about the material science improving, and we see, we've already talked about the America's Cup boats that are kind of, the crazy technology, the advances in material science, and now they've got foiling cats, foiling monohulls. I personally, I can't see a time when foiling cruising boats are going to be a thing. I think they're just going to be too inherently dangerous and unstable. What are your thoughts on how leisure sailing is going to change over the next 30 years?
Look, the one constant is that you cruise to places that are pretty much the same as they were 100 years ago and beforehand, and that's what you cruise for. You go, you cruise to go, to discover new places, to enjoy new friends, that sort of thing. So that doesn't really change.
Yep.
The boats will just continue to get better. Like the advances in navigation, that sort of thing, just makes it so much easier for people. That's a blessing and a curse, of course, because people then suddenly become navigators without having done any of the,
Yep.
what's behind it work.
Yep.
And I'm a bit like that. When I did most of my ocean racing and most of my cruising, it was all with the sextant, and I could not use the sextant now to save my life. I could probably learn again, but I take the easy path and use the GPS. The materials, the engineering are just making boats so much more, so much safer, so much more comfortable, so much more reliable. So that's the sort of thing that will continue. What's going to happen in 30 years? I could not have predicted these America's Cup boats a few years ago. No way.
No, it's just seeing the future today.
I just think, but some of those things, like for example, the technology of foiling, I don't see any cruising boats foiling. That, to me, doing the fastest I've ever sailed is it was about 25 knots, and 25 knots, if you're in a car, virtually feels as though you could get out and walk.
Yep.
25 knots on a big boat through big seas, and it's scary. Your adrenaline is right up there. We're not built for that. We can't sustain that. Other than these amazing single-handed races around the world, we don't seem to be built like that. So we're comfortable, cruising at 10 knots is very sustainable.
Yep.
We can handle it. Our bodies can handle it. Our minds can handle it. And at 10 knots, you can really get somewhere.
Yep.
And that's what a boat like the 1370 gives you.
Yep.
And you can do it now. You can crash off waves. You can do terrible things to your boat, and your boat won't fall to bits if it's well engineered and if it's well built. And that's, again, these are the sort of things that are coming out of the technology that we're seeing. But what will happen is that we will see, in the right sort of conditions, being able to maybe do some partial foiling on your cruising boat. So it'll be something that's completely tucked away until you need it. But then in the right conditions, flat seas.
Out comes a little wing and.
Yeah, it'll make the boat. It'll make a 12-ton boat think it's only 6 tons or something. You might not fall completely out of the water, but you might lift the boat. These sort of advances I can see will come into cruising, but I don't see too many people wanting to cruise on crazy boats.
Yeah, there will always be a few. And finally, look, one question we get asked a lot is about our favourite sailing destinations, what we love to do. Obviously, you've sailed locally around Australia. You've sailed, across oceans. Describe to me your perfect day on the water.
Look, any day you're not wet and miserable is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Although there's times I've been wet and miserable and I've had the best time of my life. Sailing's interesting because if you're sitting in your house and it's absolutely blowing and it's raining and carrying on, you can't think of anything worse than going out in a boat. But when you're actually on the boat and you're out in the middle of the ocean and it's blowing and it's raining, it's sometimes fantastic.
Yeah.
It's very exhilarating, and you think, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. But if you look at I think the important thing is sail with people you love.
Yep.
That's really important, and people you really enjoy being with.
Yep.
That makes sailing pretty damn good. But I was thinking of my favourite destinations. I loved sailing in the tropics. Sailing in the tropics is just an amazing experience. Especially at night when it's warm. A mosquito about to bite you.
I'll get it.
Sailing in the tropics when it's warm at night. You're doing 7, 8, 9 knots. On a flat sea with a big tropical moon. That's pretty special.
Yeah.
I've sailed down to Tasmania, and where it's not tropical, but the waters are so clean and pristine, and you think, wow, this is pretty special.
Yeah.
I think there's just so many, and you don't have to sail, to the tropics or to Tasmania. You can just sail around the corner, out the heads, and up to a bit of a secluded beach, and you can have a pretty special experience. So I don't know, it's all good.
It is all good, and there's someone far cleverer than me that's once said that your worst day sailing is always going to be better than your best day at the office, and I think there's probably
he wasn't that clever.
Richard, so thank you so much. So Richard Ward, CEO of Seawind, a hugely experienced sailor, and someone who it's lovely to see, has passed on, the same knowledge that I was getting in the UK. Start small, start simple, and enjoy what you do, because it is a life-changing and life-affirming experience, and something that we really are looking forward to continuing as we progress onto our new boat and take that into the tropics and hopefully sail some amazing night sails. So thank you for watching this episode, another Technical Tuesday, different to what we normally do, but I hope that you found that interesting. Again, feel free to subscribe to the channel. There is a little click button down there. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, and leave us a comment. Give us some ideas of how you started sailing, how you wish to start sailing, and any other experiences that you've had that you want to share with us. So thank you for watching. Goodbye.